Okay, so had a question from Darren, which is quite a good one, and basically it was all about the basic troubleshooting videos that I did on airbrushing. Now, the trouble with those is I missed out some key areas about textures of paints and things like that. Okay, and they're quite old, so I thought it'd be quite a nice touch just to reshoot this actual area. Now, apologies for the noise outside, but we're a very big hole being dug, so if you do hear a little bit of traffic, that's what that is. Okay, so when I do the airbrushing courses, which many of you have come to now, you'll know this because we cover this as we make our way through. Basically what we do, we talk about the actual paint texture and how it affects things. And one of the first things I get you to do when you come here is to basically prime up plastic art. Now everyone, when they come here, they get to these sheets of plastic art. Okay, they come along and they'll work on these before they work on the models. Normally we do a morning of lessons and things like that. You know the reason why. This is purely because when you're spraying onto paper towel, it's not a representation because you can't see the texture, which is obviously what we're covering here, but also for things like runs, spitting, stuff like that, paper towel just absorbs it. So really it's just a total false economy. Anybody can spray on paper. That's, you know, doing it on plastic art is something else. So some ways it's quite handy to have a sheet of plastic art because you can just prime it, strip it back, whatever you want to do, and use it again and again. And for something that will cost you, you know, 50p, it's easy. And then when you do need plastic art, you can always cut it up. Anyway, what we're going to do is cover what I sort of cover with these things. So first of all, because this is new plastic art, the same as the guys do here, I always get them just a bit of airbrush cleaner down and to give these sheets a white, purely because if you try and spray on them, you know, you get quite a sort of gooey mess of them off, but also you can have oil, release film and everything else during the manufacturing process. So by doing this, cuts out that problem, okay, and just makes it a bit better. So what we'll do, just a wipe over there. All right, so normally we talk about priming and that, but this is a good one we can do for texture. What I'm going to do is show you with three types of paint. So I've got some Model Air, which, as we know, use it straight out the bottle, spray it down, no problem at all. Tamiya, we've all used it, okay, very forgiving paint. Again, you can see the texture with it quite well. Then we're going to talk about odd type paint. So, you know, the Italian one is like this. It's very, very thick, so you have to play with it to make it spray. It's not like, you know, Model Air or Tamiya, which, you know, Tamiya is, I know, 50-50 mix, any air pressure, you can spray it. Model Air, just put it in your airbrush, basically any air pressure, you can spray it. This stuff you need to play with a little bit, which is something we'll talk about in a moment. So, first of all, we need an airbrush. So hopefully we can find one that works. All right, we just come in here. So we're just gonna, usual thing, bit of airbrush cleaner, just a little bit, just to see it spraying. So what you do, you look at how it's coming out, okay? Because this will affect your spray pattern as well. If you've got an airbrush with a lot of build up around the actual diffuser area, like in here, things like that, what can happen is it can actually affect your spray pattern. So if you've got a two-prong cap like we have on this guy, like this, if you've got build up on both of the ends of the prongs and you spray it, it will make things very, very speckly, okay? And because you've got speckly, that gives you a rough texture and can cause you no end of trouble. Okay, so making sure your needle's clean, your airbrush is clean and everything else, because as I said, if you've got goo in there and it's struggling for breath, as I call it, when perhaps the nozzle's blocked and you only got a small amount of paint coming through, that means there's a lot of air coming through and not a lot of paint. Well, that can cause texture as well. So by making sure that your airbrush, you're looking at it, you can see plenty of cleaner coming out of it, or thinners, or whatever you're using, you know you've got a good heavy rate of flow. If it's struggling to come out and it's very low, you need to clean out your airbrush, okay? And that's just the basics of it, and something we cover here when we do the courses. Your airbrush is only as good as it's how clean it is. If it's running clean and flawless, it will just improve your airbrushing skills. If it's struggling, then obviously you're going to be fighting it all the way. So to start with, like we do during the courses, we're going to start off with a little bit of Tamiya. Now, what we're going to do in this thing, we're going to split this up into three, okay, and I'm going to show you different textures versus different amounts of thinners and the reasons why, okay. So to start with, we're just going to come in with a colour cup here. We're just going to put a little bit in the bottom, okay, and we're going to spray it neat. Now, we've all done this, we've covered it a lot recently, and basically what you're doing, when you're spraying neat, it's coming out very, very thick, and it takes a lot of air to get it out as well, so it's drying it very, very quickly as it goes. So what I'm going to do is put this sort of into 6, if you like. I'm going to clean it down there. Alright, so we're just going to start over here, and we're just going to put down a very nice layer, just in this area, just like this, and you're just trying to keep your control good. And you can see by the pattern as it's going down that it's very speckly, okay? But it's quite even, so you can go and change your scales. But as you can see, it's quite a textured type of spray to it. Now, there's two things that causes this texture. First of all, because it's thick paint. Obviously, it's having trouble atomizing the paint, okay, and laying it actually down. And because of that, the blobs, obviously as it's atomizing it, are a lot bigger than it would be if it's thinned. If it's thinned and having no trouble, it would be flicking them off and you'd have no problem with it whatsoever, okay? But because, as I say, it's quite thick, you get this type of problem. So, two things, let me just flick this on before we all smother. Now, hopefully the camera, or one of them, is going to be able to catch in the light the texture off of this guy. If we try this on the side, sorry, too close. The trouble is, when you deal with white sheet, cameras absolutely hate it because it knocks out the white balance, but you can see it's pretty textured, and when I look across it, it looks like a sanding stick. Okay, and this is purely because we've got that trouble where large particles are coming off the end of that needle, not being atomized into the smallest as they could be, and it's going down. Good thing about it though is great coverage. So if you are thinking about things like putting it down for wheel wells, spraying white especially, spraying black around canopies, we've covered it a lot. When we're going to be doing our tornado canopies to make them look black, I will actually use thick paint. Twofold reasons. One is it goes down, it covers a lot better than thin paint, i.e. it's not going to run around, it's not going to be able to get underneath the tape either, because obviously it'll be all masked up. The thicker the paint, the less chance it's actually got to get underneath tape and cause bleeding and stuff like that. Now, a lot of people will tell you you can't do fine lines with thick paint. So this is just what we've used here. I'm not changing the air pressure, and we're spraying around about 30 psi, okay? But you can come down, all right, and we're going to put in, and people will tell you you can't do thin, tiny, little hard lines and stuff like that. I beg to differ. You can make anything a very, very thin line, and this is thick paint. People will tell you you can't do this, you know? Don't forget, this is neat paint going down. Do a thin line. Again, I beg to differ, okay? Obviously, if it's thinner, I can make it a little bit thinner line, but I can get down to probably even less than that. Okay? The only thing you will notice, because it is thick paint, when you look at it, you've actually got speckles all each side of it that are quite heavy, all right? But if we now make a 50-50 mix, so we're just going to double up on thinners in here, and grab a brush. Sorry guys, I've lost my little cleaning brush. I have to be careful here because I've got so many brushes with so many things on the go. Okay. So what we've got in here is basically a 50-50 mix. Okay, so we've obviously got the thick stuff in the first part of the needle, so we want to lose that. Okay, immediately you will notice you can hear and see visually the thin paint coming through, because suddenly, instead of it coming out, it suddenly dumps out really, really quickly. Okay, now if we put this next to our other guy here, hopefully you can see we are not covering as well as we did the first time. And look how wet that is. Okay, so it's going to take quite a bit to cover, purely because it's very wet and going down and everything else. So if I just dry this back, because it's thin paint as well, you're going to take more to cover it, because obviously it's just not as thick, it's not covering as well. Okay, so I've basically gone through the same amount of paint that I did there just to do this bit. I know it's slightly bigger, but you get the point to this. Okay, but when we're coming into doing our little fine line jobbies, okay, we can come in here. As you can see, I can go in and do fine lines, but again, if you look at them, they are not as covered as well as the thick paint, purely because of the amount of it. Now, by turning down the air pressures and the various things of playing it, you can actually get this down to be something quite nice. Just clean a little touch. Okay. See, you can go from quite a thick to a thin to no problem at all. It's even all the way down here. I don't know if the camera actually gets that bit, but you can see it's just one of those things. Now, as that's drying, we can now cover up. Okay, let's just do this bit here. We can dry this, and what I'll do is I'll just do another mix. So thinners goes in first. Then I'll paint 50-50 mix. And I'll send the colour cup. Check your flow, blow it through, and then back in again. And what we're going to do is just build up this area to get it in. Now, it is a little bit speckly on here. You'll see little speckles. That's purely because it's picking up dust from the paper towel. Again, if you can, I've got some down here. If you use something like a Lazy Susan type thing on top, it's higher than the paper towel. It stops this dust and particles all coming up and sticking onto your actual work. So if you wanted to, you can come along with something like this and spray onto this, and you'll notice you won't get as much dust particles coming up. Okay, so if I just backfill this in, let's try and cover this a bit better. Here. Now also, what happens is, because it's got thinners in it, it's taking longer to dry, which means it's able to self-level. Okay, which you can then go along and do this. Okay, now if I dry this down a little bit from up on high, what will happen is, because it's taking longer to dry, the thinners all sort of eats into the paint that's there and everything else, and gives you a very smooth finish to your paintwork. Okay, so if I just dry this down, and remember this is the same paint every time, it's no difference in paint. Okay, so if I just dry this off, I might have to make an edit here, otherwise you're going to sit and watch paint dry. Okay, so there we go. Now, hopefully you can see on one of the cameras, probably the side camera's a nice one, you can see the difference. We've got this one here is a different colour to this one here, but it is the same paint, alright? Again, this is where texture comes in, because actually what you've got is this one over here, being a thicker paint, it's more rough, okay? So it gives that impression of being slightly lighter because the light is reflecting off of all the lumps. So if you used to look at it at a micro level, we've got a nice sanding stick, a really coarse one, hold on. So if you used to be looking in it, it would look like a sanding stick, okay, really coarse, okay, at a micro level, versus this one over here, who's more like a medium, okay, so it's quite nicely sort of polished and everything in. So and that's the difference, but as you say, because this one's more level, it looks darker purely because it's flat and there's not as much light reflecting off of it. So this is a thing over texture plays a part in your colour. Now when we teach here, this is one of the things I talk about, how to, when I talk about tonal changes and versions of paint colour, I lighten and darken, but also I thicken and thin the paint, and it gives you a nice variation, and that's how I get that sort of broken up paint sort of colour and everything else to it. Okay, now obviously what I do with the guys now, which is a bit long-winded, is that I show about glossing with a flat. Okay, and basically you heavily thin it and you put it down really heavy, and it basically goes like an almost a gloss finish even with a flat paint. And this is something we spoke about by using clear recently, when we spoke about that actually if you put it down quite, you know, lightly and dusty coats from further away. You get a flat finish if you're coming in a bit closer. It's a satin. If you're flooding it, you can get the gloss. Okay, it's exactly the same principles with any type of paint. And so this is really sort of a follow-on from that one. Now, some of the problems you can get. Okay, spitting. Now, if you're getting into a situation when you're coming in with your paintwork, let's put this guy over, okay, and you're literally getting spitting, it can be obviously a problem we spoke about with the nozzle before. It could be a bent needle. It could be that there's a flow actually inside, so it's actually getting lumps of paint coming in. Putting your thinner in first will stop a lot of that, because sometimes what can happen is you can get thick paint in there and then it's always down there during your entire airbrushing session, okay? So you just want to be careful with that. The other problem you can get, of course, is actually, let me just offload that a moment. Okay, if I just do a very quick colour change. So a quick colour change, literally dollop of thinner of airbrush cleaner, rub around your colour cup. Don't blow this out through your airbrush, and don't cover all your stuff and paperwork and everything with it, but you get feeling speedy. Have this, then dump it. Another small amount of airbrush cleaner goes in your airbrush, give it a swill, dump it. Don't try and blow that out. The thing is, if you was to blow that out, okay, if you was try to actually put it through your airbrush and blow that out, all that scum around the top and crud will go down into your needle and the nozzle area, and when you get in there, then that's the bit where, you know, when you're spraying and it stops and then it starts and then it stops and then you can get it to come through and then it stops. It's because you've got build up down the end. The paint is physically having trouble getting past, especially with acrylics. It sticks to the outside, and many people I see, especially the guys who have come here, they will literally give it a rub round and then they blow it all out. All the dried stuff around the top gets sucked down into the needle area, blocks your nozzle. So just literally blow it all out from the back and that'll really help you. Now, when you're dealing with a funny paint, like we've got here, this below, we've got a darker one, should be right with this one. Okay, so we've got here, this stuff is extremely thick, so I'm not going to go over the top here. If we just put a bit of this in here, okay, now this stuff is really, really thick, but again, a good high air pressure behind it, we can spray this out even neat. Okay, we've got a good clean airbrush, it's spraying in neat and everything else. But same thing again when we're putting it down. There we go, got both colours all coming through now. You can see we've got different versions of the colour in there. Quick thing, what it isn't mixed properly. And I've taken the black off the top versus the stuff underneath. This is because this stuff is like glue. Very, very thick. All of this lot, by the way, I'm shooting standard 27 psi and it's the 0.2 needle in this one. I don't use anything else these days, okay? So let's just try that experiment slightly again. You might be able to see this literally is like glue as it went in there. Okay? But if you're doing it, and here we're getting some spattering, so if I sort of run in with some real tight stuff, okay? And I must admit, one thing I've learned is the amount of guys that come here and they say, oh, you can't, you have to thin your paint and have lower your air pressure for tiny little thin lines. This stuff is neat. Okay? That is such old school. I'm sorry guys if you believe it and all the rest of it, but you're stuck in the 70s. Modern airbrushes can cope with extremely thick paints as long as you've got the air pressure behind it. And I do believe this is the trouble, is that a lot of people are back in the 70s still, a school of airbrushing where you were using cans. You know, I know guys who use still today use inner tubes. Well, you're not going to get 30 psi out of an inner tube lying in your room next to your spraying, okay? You do need a compressor. But you say 27 psi, and I can do thin lines with this paint, which is exactly the same stuff really as the Vallejo model colour, just white tops, the thick stuff. But you can go in and you can put down some very nice, you know, freehand stuff like that, as in hard, and it will do the thicker stuff. But what can happen is, and I'm trying to get it to do it now. Okay, here we go. I can hear like a flicking sound. Okay, and what it is, it's having trouble getting it off of the needle. The area between the nozzle and the needle itself, it's getting build up there and it's struggling. And I'm pulling the needle quite a long way back to get anything to come out. And now we go, we're stopping, starting. Okay, we've stopped. I've got that all the way back now and nothing is coming out. You can see that? And we've got bubbles now coming up the top, purely because it's now blocked the end. And I'm hoping one of the cameras will see this. What's happening is, because the paint is so thick, you might be able to see we've got the little tip. That actually is dried paint. This guy here is off the end of the needle, okay? And now it's just struggling. You might be able to see it's really spitty. That's full pullback. So now, obviously, if it was thinned, I could flood this entire area. But look, that is maximum pull, and it's just struggling with it. Because all down in the nozzle area now, it's just congealed with thick paint, and it can't actually get anything in there. The air, because that's coming around from the outside, no problem at all. Still got the same amount of air, but the paint flow itself is absolutely canned it now. And it's going to struggle, and now it's stopped again, and I'm pumping the trigger. Okay. And it's spitting now. We've got lumps coming off the ends. There we go. Did you hear it come through? It's purely because this area is saturated with thick paint and it needs to get it out the way. So, my point of view, what I would do is you'd come in with your thinners, put a bit in there here, okay, tip that bit out from the top. And this is probably the only time you'll see me backflow. Steady. No, by backflow, what I actually mean is you cover the nozzle, okay, and then squeeze the trigger very gently because you haven't got a colour cup on. And you'll get bubbles, like here, sorry, coming out the top. What that is, you're actually forcing air the wrong way, okay, which I know a lot of guys will use it for cleaning purposes. And with this particular airbrush, it's Teflon seals, it's triple sealed, it's everything. I don't imagine it is going to go back, but actually what you're trying to do is force air back up the needle. So if you've got a cheaper airbrush, definitely don't do it. But what it does, it forces it obviously towards the colour cup and it can get out via the colour cup. But if you've got a lid on, you'll force more air than can get out that small hole, then it goes up towards your needle. It puts pressure on the back seal, which is one you don't really want to get, you know, to fail. But now we've pushed that up there a little bit, what it's done is mix this paint down in here. So every time you push all the paint up, it goes back down, and each time it should wash through. So now when we come along, hopefully, here we go, but you can see, this is where we need another bit. What you've got is big spitting, this lumps going down. Sorry, I've over-zoomed the camera a little bit. Let me pull you out so you guys can see all of this. But you can probably see we're getting spitting. This is this thick stuff that's built up in the end here, okay? So some of it occasionally is getting down to the end and then it's being atomized, but it's purely because it's not mixed properly, okay? So this is the thing. So now we've got lumps in this paintwork. So if I just blow this through, hopefully you can see you've actually got now all this lumps. I know the camera's not doing a fantastic job today, but you can see these lumps in all of this. So actually that's caused by the bits coming in. So what we're talking now is back to the basics of a good paint mix before you come in. So if you're using something like a model air bottle, which you can't see as it's coming out, all right, then sometimes you can have a lump go in, that lump gets down the end and then bits of it break off. That can cause your spitting, that can cause your texturing and everything else like that, okay? So, a couple of paints I recommend you keep an eye on, okay, and use something like this. This is a filter that I've knocked out. I've got one of my old wash bottles that I cut down. It's a little bit of stocking or tight mesh on it, like this, and I filter my painting through it and I just rinse it out afterwards, okay? It's paints especially like extra acrylics, definitely, okay? White top model air, I like to thin that as well. I find that it goes very, very thick. If you've got an old bottle of something, e.g., I've got a good example here, one of these, this one actually. If you've got a bottle like this, which has crust and crud all round it, okay? always filter it, because if one of these crispy bits around the top gets down in there, it will soften, and then it's going to bung up, and then it's going to come apart, and then it's going to flick, and it's going to spit. If you're into a situation like that, and let's face it, I am terrible, because look, this is just about to paint the Tornado, and look at the state of it. I've got crust and crud, and I know a lot of you, especially the guys that come here, clean the bottles every time you put the lid on. You should do that. It's purely because I'm lazy and I just chuck them in and everything else. But you will find, if you go out and buy a brand new bottle of extra acrylics, as a classic example, a clean airbrush, spray it, you will have a perfect model, perfect finish every single time. You try and do it the second time, perhaps like a year later, you've got a skin formed around the top, you've poured it, it's gone in there, it spits, it starts, it stops, and everything else. It's all it is something has got down in that area. If you filter your paint, you'll stop a lot of that headache, okay? And it's one of those common things. I get a lot of guys in here and they say about, obviously, you know, like you, Darren, have said you have trouble with spitting and things like that. Filter your paint first. You'll be amazed the difference you can make. And obviously the other thing as well is good, clean maintenance of your airbrush. I speak about it obviously when we're doing the courses. I highly, highly recommend that once you finish cleaning out your airbrush, okay, now this is just a quick job. Normally I would show something else. Again, first rub like that, I've tipped it. Cotton buds as well. Make sure you use a good quality cotton bud. Don't use a cheap one, because the fibres come off and they will stick to everywhere inside your actual airbrush. So we just give this, always wiping away from the tip. Okay, we'll just poke this in here, and then obviously I'm just going to use thinners for a minute. The thinners goes in, and you're looking to see, obviously, for it all to come out of your airbrush. Wind this back up. Okay. Get rid of this guy. Always looking for the flow to be continuous. If you've got a problem and it's spitting with thinners, take it apart, disassemble it. We've done it a million times before, completely, and you'll be absolutely fine. But once you've finished, I'm going to put a little bit of airbrush cleaner through it again. We're just taking a brush, giving it a good wipe round. We're coming in the needle area, always brushing carefully around the needle, but we're also getting all the particles off the end here, so it's all nice and clean. Okay. I'm brushing all round the neck and everything else like that, just get rid of all the rubbish. Alright, then we're just going to give it all a wipe away. Then if you use a clean bit of tissue, or your kitchen roll, or whatever you're using to blow it in, a rag, blow it through, and you're looking for these guys. You might see them. We've got little speckles in there, but that's only a few. I can live with that. We're coming in again, just going to fill up again. Okay, and we're going to blow through. Another one, nothing in there whatsoever. Okay, so we can give that all a nice wipe round here, swiveling the front end as well, making sure that's all working, giving it a good rub, and we're getting all this dirt off around the front here. Okay, so what I do, final thing, once I'm finished for the day, I put a bit in. When it disappears from the needle, I'll leave it, and it won't leak or come out or anything else like that. But what it is, it's keeping a tiny little bit of thinners in that front end, and it's keeping it moist. Now, although a lot of people think, oh, what about your airbrush? If you've got a good quality airbrush, okay, and not a Chinese knockoff, it's not going to hurt it, because everything's designed to have fluids in here. It's Teflon seals in this one and everything else. And good rubber seals won't be a problem either, and it's not going to rust, okay? And the thing is, a good airbrush cleaner, and to be honest, I do love this stuff, and I've been using it now for probably the last 10 years, the Vallejo airbrush cleaner. It has a little bit of lubricant in it that actually just keeps everything sort of lubricated and moved. So I very rarely lube up using super lube my needle or anything else like that. I tend to do that when it has a deep maintenance, perhaps every couple of months. But when you've come up to do, you just blow it out for the first blow. That way it stops your needle from jamming and locking and everything else like that. And that way you put your paint in and you're good to go right out of the bat. And to be honest, I hardly ever take the nozzle off of my airbrush out and clean it. I find I don't have trouble with it build up. If it does, you can buy things like, I think they're all somewhere else. I might be able to find one here. Hold on, they might be in here. Try and find them. No, hold on. You've got, here it is. You can buy things like this for them. This is a reamer. Okay, it's got a flat plated thing, but it's specially designed for hardening steam back, so you can't splay open the nozzle. You can't jam it in too far because it won't go because of the neck. But what you can do is scrape out any dry paint in there and everything else like that. And as I say, you can buy the brushes for them as well, which again, I did have one lying around here. Here we go, red one, funny enough. This one is designed for the harder and steam back air brushes. So obviously the thin end here goes right up inside and it will go right up to the seal, okay, without ripping it apart and going through, okay. But it cleans it all out totally. And then you've got your other end as well for going in and doing the nozzles and various bits and pieces like that. So they are two quite handy bits to have. They're going to set you back about 20 quid, I think, in total with postage. But if you haven't got these and you have got harder and steam back, it's a good way of doing a deep clean and everything else. So there we go. There you go, Darren. That one's especially for you. And everything else. If you want to see more things like this, just shout me a PM or put it in the tips area. You want to see it on the site, and I'll get round to you.